The night sky above the earth was quiet. In the command halls deep under the capital, the silence of the stars weighed heavy on everyone. For weeks, the stations at the edge of the colonies had sent warnings. Strange signals had been found, sharp and cold, like a drumbeat in the dark. Then, without reason, the signals stopped. The stations no longer answered. The silence was worse than the warnings. Ethan stood at the glass wall of the war room, watching lights blink on the large screen. Each light showed a colony, each light a home for thousands of people. His jaw was set hard. He had been a soldier for many years, but he had never seen silence spread like this. It was not the silence of peace, it was the silence before blood. Claire walked in behind him. She was tall and moved with the strength of someone who had trained for battles most people could not imagine. She did not speak at first. She only looked at the same screen, eyes fixed on the dead spaces where lights had gone out. At last she said that they had to move. Waiting would only kill more people. Jason entered with Nathan at his side. Jason carried the weight of heavy weapons, his arms strong and his back marked with scars of past fights. Nathan, quieter but no less fierce, checked a list of supplies on his pad.
Out.
Both men knew they would be called soon. When warriors were needed, silence was their enemy. Sophia came last. She was younger than the rest, but her mind worked faster than fire. She had studied every signal, every pattern, every blink of strange light. She said the signals had meaning. Someone had tried to warn them before the silence came. She was sure of it. The doors opened again, and the messenger of the Queen entered. The Queen ruled the outer colonies with an iron hand. Her word was law, her command final. The messenger read the order with no emotion. The order was clear. Ethan, Claire, Jason, Nathan, and Sophia would go beyond the safe borders. They would find the truth behind the silence. If they found enemies, they would strike without delay. Ethan took the order and said nothing. He knew the Queen's hand was heavy. She demanded loyalty without question. To disobey her was death. Still, deep inside him, he wondered if this command was for the people or for her power. The 5 warriors walked through the hangar. A massive warship waited for them. The steel was dark and cold, the engines humming like a storm trapped in chains. Crew members saluted as the warriors passed. They all knew who boarded this ship. They were not common soldiers. They were the sharp edge of humanity, the ones who went where no one else dared. Inside the ship, Claire checked the armor of her team. She tightened the straps on Jason's gear and nodded to Nathan as he loaded heavy rounds into cases. Sophia sat near the control desk, typing fast, her eyes never leaving the screen. Ethan walked between them, calm but watchful. He spoke little, yet his presence was enough to steady them. The ship lifted from the hangar and rose into the black. Earth fell behind, and the long road of stars opened before them. Silence was still there, deep and endless. But now, 5 warriors moved through it. If the silence was a trap, they would not wait for it to close. It would strike first. In the halls of the capital, the Queen watched the ship leave. Her face was hidden in shadow, but her voice carried across the chamber. She said that the silence would not rule humanity. Humanity would rule the silence. The warship cut through the dark space like a blade. Inside the ship, the warriors moved with purpose. Every step they took sounded heavy on the steel floor. They knew their mission carried no promise of return. Ethan stood near the front console, his eyes on the endless stars outside. He did not trust the silence. He knew silence could hide more than noise. Claire stood next to him, her hand resting on the rifle strapped across her chest. She watched Ethan but said nothing. She trusted his mind, but she also knew the Queen's command weighed on him. Jason sat in the lower bay, cleaning the heavy gun mounted to his suit. He had carried that gun through more battles than he could count. Nathan stood nearby, stacking round after round into crates. He worked without pause, his face calm but his eyes sharp. The 2 men were different, but together they made a wall of fire. Sophia worked in the control room, her hands flying across the screens. She was tracing the last broken signals from the colonies. The data came in fragments, jagged and sharp, like pieces of a puzzle missing its heart. She called Ethan to her side and showed him the lines of numbers that made no sense. She said the silence was not natural. Someone or something had cut the flow of life from those worlds. The ship crossed the border of the safe zones and entered the wild reaches. No stations answered their calls. No lights appeared on their scans. It was a graveyard of stars. The crew moved with tense breath, knowing every second could be their last. Hours later, the ship came upon a planet. The surface was scarred. Towers once proud now lay broken. Cities were nothing more than black bones against the sky. Ethan ordered the ship to land. The engines roared as the ship dropped into the ruins. The ramp opened, and the warriors stepped onto the dead ground. Dust rose around their boots, drifting through the hollow streets. No voices called, no movement stirred. Claire raised her rifle, sweeping the shadows with sharp eyes. Jason and Nathan walked ahead with heavy weapons ready. Sophia stayed close to Ethan, her device scanning for signals. They moved through a street where burned machines lay twisted. The walls of homes were marked with fire and ash. Nathan bent and picked up a piece of shattered armor. He turned it in his hands, his brow hard. He said this was no natural ruin. This was battle. Ethan looked at the towers, their tops broken as if cut by giant blades. He said the silence here was not the silence of death alone. It was silence meant to hide. Claire tightened her grip on her rifle. She felt eyes on them, though the streets were empty. The team reached the center of the ruined city. A great hall stood there, its doors half broken, its roof torn wide. They stepped inside. The air was thick with dust.
Guys.
Long tables lay overturned. Weapons were scattered on the floor.
Help.
Sophia scanned the hall with her device and caught a trace of signal deep below the ground. The hollow sound told them there were tunnels under the hall. Ethan ordered them to find a way down. He pried open a broken stairway and descended into the dark. The tunnel smelled of burned metal and old smoke. Their lights cut through the black, showing long tracks of machines dragged away. Nathan whispered that this was a retreat. Whoever had fought here had fallen back into deeper ground. As they moved forward, Sophia's device screamed with sudden light. She showed Ethan the screen. The signal was strong now. It pulsed with steady rhythm, like a heartbeat waiting in the dark. Ethan lifted his weapon and told the team to be ready. The silence was no longer empty. The silence was watching. The tunnels stretched far beneath the ruined city. The walls were cracked, and the ground shook with faint echoes. Ethan led the team with his rifle raised, his eyes searching every shadow. Claire followed close behind, scanning each corner with sharp focus. Jason and Nathan guarded the rear with heavy weapons ready, while Sophia stayed in the middle with her device glowing in her hands. The deeper they went, the stronger the signal became, beat like a drum, steady and cold, pulling them forward. Every step felt heavier, as if the air itself wanted to stop them. Nathan muttered that the silence above had been a trap, and now they were walking into the jaws of it. Jason said he welcomed it, his hands gripping the trigger of his weapon tighter. They came to a large chamber deep underground. The walls were covered with scorch marks. Broken machines lay in piles, twisted and sharp. A faint light flickered from a control panel still alive on the far side. Sophia rushed to it and began working. Her fingers moved fast as she tried to pull what data remained. Suddenly, a sharp noise cut through the silence. It was not the sound of metal breaking, but the sound of footsteps. Ethan raised his hand, and the team froze. Shadows moved along the far wall, figures stepping out of the dark. The first shot came fast. Claire dropped low and fired, the sound blasting through the chamber. Jason and Nathan opened fire, their weapons roaring with fury. The air filled with smoke and fire. Figures fell, but more poured out of the tunnels. "At!" Ethan shouted orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. He pushed forward with Claire on his flank. They moved as one, covering each other with sharp bursts of fire. Jason set his heavy gun on a broken block and unleashed a storm that shook the chamber. Nathan stood beside him, reloading with steady hands, even as bullets cracked past his head. Sophia stayed behind the panel, but she did not run. Her device connected to the systems, and she found a stream of hidden files. She copied them into her pad, even as the ground shook under the fight. Her voice rang out that the Queen had known this was here. This ambush was no surprise to her. She had sent them here to be tested. Ethan heard her words, and his heart grew hard. He fired again and again, driving the enemy back. But inside him a fire burned. The Queen had used them. The silence had been known, the trap expected, yet she had sent them in without warning. The battle raged. Jason shouted as his gun tore apart a wave of attackers, but his ammo began to run dry. Nathan threw him another crate, and the two fought like a wall of steel. Claire charged forward, her rifle striking with deadly aim. She shouted for Ethan to push left, and together they cleared a path through the center. The floor shook as explosives went off along the far side. Dust and stone rained down. The chamber roared with fire and screams. Ethan ordered the team to fall back toward the stair, but Sophia yelled that she needed more time. Her screen showed a locked file, the final piece of the hidden plan. She said if she broke it, they would know everything. Shh. Ethan gave her the time she asked. He stood in front of her, rifle blazing, covering her from the waves that tried to reach her. Claire joined him, side by side, their fire crossing in the dark. Jason and Nathan guarded the flanks, pushing back every rush with thunder. At last, Sophia broke the lock. The screen opened and she gasped at what she saw. She said the Queen had not only known of the silence, but had ordered it to remain. She had wanted to draw the warriors into this place. This was not rescue. This was her trial for them. The last of the attackers fell, and the chamber grew quiet again. Smoke hung in the air, thick and bitter. The warriors stood breathing hard, their bodies marked by dust and blood. Ethan lowered his rifle. His eyes burned with anger. The silence had been a lie, and now he knew the Queen's hand was behind it. He swore that this fight was no longer just survival. This fight was for truth. The chamber was still filled with smoke when the warriors pulled back into the upper tunnels. Their bodies were tired, but their spirit burned harder than before. They had survived the ambush, but Sophia's discovery weighed heavy on them. The Queen had known, and she had sent them into death with cold purpose. Ethan led the way, his face set like stone. He did not speak, but his silence told the others what they already felt. This mission was no longer only about finding the truth of the silence. It was about deciding where their loyalty truly stood. Claire walked beside him, her rifle ready. She looked at Ethan and asked if he still meant to obey the Queen's command. Ethan said they would complete the mission, but they would not fight for the crown alone. They would fight for the people who could not defend themselves. His words steadied the team. Jason and Nathan followed close, their heavy weapons strapped to their backs. Jason spat dust from his mouth and said the Queen wanted warriors who would bleed for her pride. Nathan said she would learn they were not her tools. The two men carried the weight of anger as well as steel. Sophia walked behind them with her pad pressed to her chest. She had seen enough files to understand the Queen's plan. The silence of the colonies had been forced by her command. She wanted to see which warriors would rise from the trial and which would fall. Sophia's hand shook, but her voice was firm when she swore she would not let the Queen's shadow rule them. The tunnels opened into the ruins above. The city lay dead and quiet under a cold sky. The ship still waited in the square, its engines dark, but alive. As they neared, more figures rose from the rubble. Another wave of attackers came forward, blades and rifles flashing in the dust. Ethan shouted for the team to hold the line. Claire dropped to one knee and opened fire. Jason swung his heavy gun from his back and sent a storm of rounds cutting through the charge. Nathan threw himself beside him, feeding ammo and blasting anyone who broke through. Sophia ducked behind a broken wall and used her device to send false signals into the enemy lines. The fight raged with fury. The warriors moved like parts of one body. Ethan drove straight into the center, his rifle blazing. Claire covered his flank with sharp, clean shots. Jason and Nathan turned the air into thunder, cutting down waves that tried to close around them. Sophia's false signals made the attackers stumble, some turning on each other in confusion. One by one, the enemy fell until the square lay filled with bodies and smoke. The last shot echoed, and silence came again. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow and ordered them to regroup. The team gathered near the ship. Their armor was marked with burns, their faces streaked with dirt, but their eyes were bright with fire. Sophia showed them her screen again. She had unlocked another message buried in the files. It was from the Queen herself. In it, she praised the warriors who survived and demanded they push deeper into the dead worlds to prove themselves worthy. Her voice was cold, her words sharp. She did not see them as men and women. She saw them as blades to be sharpened until they broke. Jason cursed loud and struck the side of the ship with his fist. Nathan said this was no queen for humanity. This was a ruler who sought glory and blood. Claire looked at Ethan and waited for his word. Ethan stood tall, his rifle across his chest. He told them the queen might command, but humanity did not belong to one voice. They were not her pawns. They were the shield and the sword of the people. If silence was forced on the colonies, they would break it. If trials were set before them, they would not fall, they would rise. The team entered the ship and powered the engines. The roar shook the square as fire burst from its thrusters. The ship lifted into the sky once more, carrying warriors who no longer fought for the crown, but for truth. The silence had been used as a weapon, but now the deadliest warriors of humanity would turn that weapon back. The queen had called them to prove themselves. They would answer, but not as her servants. They would answer as free men and women ready to fight for all who had no voice. The engines of the warship roared as it crossed the dark skies of the ruined world. Inside, the warriors stood in silence, each of them preparing for the final strike. They knew the queen's trial was not finished. She had demanded more. Her voice still echoed in their minds, cold and sharp. But none of them would fight for her pride. They would fight to end the silence and protect those who could not stand. Ethan stood at the front console, his eyes locked on the map Sophia had drawn from the stolen files. Deep beneath the planet was the largest stronghold. It was the source of the signals and the heart of the Queen's trial. He ordered the ship to descend. Claire checked her rifle and tightened the strap of her armor. Jason and Nathan loaded the last crates of ammunition, each round heavy with promise. Sophia adjusted her pad, ready to turn the enemy's own systems against them. The warship landed near the edge of a shattered canyon. Smoke rose from vents hidden in the ground. The air was thick with the smell of fire and ash. Ethan ordered the ramp down, and the team marched into the canyon. Their boots struck hard against stone as they moved. They found the entrance carved deep into the rock. Heavy doors blocked the way, scarred with battle marks. Jason stepped forward with explosives. Nathan helped him set the charges, and together, they wired the doors. With a sharp nod from Ethan, Jason pressed the trigger. Fire blasted the canyon walls, and the doors fell apart in thunder. The warriors stormed inside. The tunnels shook with the force of the blast. From the shadows, enemies rushed at them, shouting and firing. Claire dropped to one knee and cut them down with precise shots. Ethan charged forward, his rifle blazing. Jason and Nathan filled the air with heavy fire, the roar of their weapons drowning all else. Sophia sent false signals into the control lines, turning lights against the defenders and forcing gates to slam shut on their own men. Step by step, the team pushed deeper. The halls burned with the clash of steel and gunfire. Ethan led from the front, striking without fear. Claire covered his sides, her shots never missing. Jason's heavy fire tore holes through the walls of defense, while Nathan reloaded with speed and fired into every gap.
Oh.
Sophia stayed close, her device flashing as she turned the silence into a weapon. They reached the heart of the stronghold, a massive chamber filled with machines and towers of steel. At the center pulsed the source of the signal, a core burning with cold light. Waves of defenders poured in to stop them, but the warriors stood unshaken. Jason planted his heavy gun and unleashed a storm. Nathan stood beside him, firing until his rifle burned. Claire and Ethan charged together, their shots breaking the enemy line. Sophia hacked the core, forcing it to overload. The fight was brutal. Smoke filled the chamber, fire spread across the floor, and screams echoed through the steel. Jason and Nathan fought like giants, holding back the flood with thunder in their hands. Claire struck down every foe that broke through. Ethan reached the core with Sophia, covering her as she worked. Sophia shouted that the overload was ready. The core would collapse the stronghold from within. Ethan called to the team to fall back. Jason and Nathan pulled their weapons free and fought their way toward the exit. Claire cleared the path with sharp fire. The warriors ran through the burning halls as the ground shook. Behind them, the chamber exploded in light. The stronghold collapsed, stone and steel breaking under the force. The canyon shook as fire rose into the sky. The silence that had haunted the colonies shattered in the roar of the blast. The team reached the warship and climbed aboard. As the engines lifted them away, They looked down at the ruins. The trial was over. The Queen had wanted to see if they would survive. They had not only survived, but destroyed the very test set before them. Ethan stood before his team, his voice firm. He said they had fought not for the Queen, but for humanity. They were not her pawns. They were warriors who carried the fire of their people. Jason, Nathan, Claire, and Sophia stood with him, their faces marked with dust, but their eyes burning bright. The warship rose higher, leaving the dead world behind. The silence was broken. Humanity's deadliest warriors had answered, and their names would not be forgotten.